So, I really want to be precise with my wording on this video, and I'm actually using a teleprompter, as Gerald does himself. Probably trying to use some of the tips from his teleprompter video. Definitely check that out. Anyway, you saw the title, what this video is going to be about. What did Gerald get wrong about the GH6? Well, I could go into detail, but honestly, the real answer is not much. He got pretty much everything right. Kind of. And sure, he did point out that you should probably use the boosted dynamic range mode all the time for ultimate image quality, but in various other reviews, it didn't really seem to make a difference in most normal situations that we'd run into, but even then, if you did want to use it, it has a super high ISO and is really hard to use. He also talked a lot about issues and even a few potentially real glaring issues with the camera, which is actually amazing because of people like him testing this camera early, telling Panasonic their findings. We're going to get a better camera with updated firmware that hopefully fixes all of or most of these things, or at least, I hope we do. Some of that banding is really super disturbing, and honestly, even older Micro Four Thirds cameras had that, but it was way worse in the GH6, so yeah, these are not the type of things Gerald Undone misses, and I'm glad he found it. Honestly, it's been a little strange that no one else talked about it, even watching some of these reviews where it was pretty apparent in footage from Potato Jet or Kai W. No, what I think Gerald really missed about the GH6 was the point. I mean, sure, the autofocus is bad. Modern full-frame cameras are probably usually going to be better in low light, dynamic range, most of the time, maybe all of the time, but so like Gerald, let's talk about Panasonic's own cameras. He talks about how they are basically objectively better when it comes to optimal image quality. As just throws that out there like a blanket statement with no real comparisons. But what I wonder is how that's really possible. So let me explain. When we first talk about the S1H, it's got an optical low pass filter which cuts down on the aliasing, but it does make the image softer. S5 on the other hand doesn't really have one, and I've noticed more sharpness and a lot more moire and aliasing on that camera. Even my old GH5 or the GH5 Mark II doesn't have that optical filter, and I never really struggled with aliasing or moire either on photos or video, except maybe in those high frame rate modes. And the GH6 here should perform even better. I think I read somewhere that it has some AI technology to smooth out aliasing, so you get kind of the best of both worlds. The super sharp, non-low pass filtered video and photos, but that AI reduction of aliasing that I never really noticed even on the older cameras that didn't have that AI. So again, sounds like the best of both worlds to me. All of the different GH5s and the GH6 have better rolling shutter than the S series cameras, and especially the S5, the biggest thing for me is the usability. The S5 has limits in 4K 10-bit all modes, and both the S1H and S5 have that forced 1.5 crop in anything over 4K 30. So we are comparing the S1H's 5.9K 30 to the GH6's 5.7K 60. Or the S1H's 1.5 times crop 4K 60 in 420 over the GH6's 4K 120 at 422. And you're probably thinking, now that I've put it that way, surely the GH6 is like, what, double the price of the S1H? What's that? I'm getting a report now. They're telling me the S1H launched at nearly double the price, and it's still $1,300 more expensive than the GH6? Now let me just read you the comment I left on his video, and maybe this will lead you to some more of my perspective on this issue. First, Gerald said on his pinned comment, "Don't forget, I'm an OG Micro Four Thirds and GH5 fan. Got lots of love and nostalgia for the system. Built my channel on it." Hey, me too. Those videos are still up. I just think we've reached the ceiling when it comes to Micro Four Thirds potential if taken in this direction. I was mostly positive on this camera, but everything is so good these days, it's hard to get excited about a release like this. But also, let's keep in mind, these are just cameras, and I'm just one bozo on the internet spouting my opinion. Let's not get too emotionally invested here. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good one. To which I said, I hope you aren't getting too much hate here. Thanks for putting in the work to find some of these issues. And you are clearly burnt out from the YouTube grind set, but I think you really missed a lot of potential talking about this camera. There's barely a positive sentence in this review for an all things considered amazing camera. I never thought I would see the day where you said MFT is dead and Tony Northrup is saying MFT is alive, but I guess that day has come. Honestly, this camera seems unbeatable for the features per dollar, with maybe slightly better, maybe slightly worse image quality, dynamic range, etc., than the Lumix or other full-frame cameras, but it is in a smaller format for $1,300 to $4,300 less. Maybe those full-frame cameras do have it beat by the margins. That would barely affect anybody once they learn how to use the camera, but it's way closer than it's been since, well, the GH5. That's my takeaway from this review compared to the rest I've seen, but of course, you've actually had hands-on, even if it was for a short time. As someone who's used the S5 and S1H, the sharpness of the S1H is definitely not on the level of the S5, and the S5 is definitely sharper, but riddled with aliasing. Two things I never struggled with on my GH5. And the GH6 seems even better. This many pro features packed into a powerhouse body for the price of an entry-level Sony or Canon full-frame camera with 4K 60 with a 1.5 crop, maybe 4K 60 with no crop at best. Anyway, thanks for the work you do, and I hope you don't see this as too confrontational. And take a break from that grind if you can. To which he said, resolution and data rates aren't the key to a better looking image. You just need enough, not the most. Dynamic range and tonality make a much bigger impact for me, which is also why the Alexa is king. Which again, just like almost everything Gerald says in his videos, and just like everything he said on his GH6 video, that is correct. He is almost always right about these things, and I don't want people to think that I don't respect his opinion or realize how detail-oriented and good he really is. I really like his stuff, his channel, but a lot of people are going to have watched this review and not got the whole picture, I feel like. Whether that picture was taken by a full-frame camera or the GH5 and the handheld high-res mode. Oh, that's a terrible joke. So yeah, I've gone over it a little bit, but here's how I'm breaking it down for myself. The GH6 is a very worthy and very logical upgrade to the GH5. Better in every way, if you can afford it. Compared to the full-frame cameras, it has comparable resolutions in their high-end S1H, with more frame rate options and all slow motion modes being 10-bit, uncropped, making it really good for slow motion recording, again up to 4K 120, 10-bit, 422. It also has way more processing power, slightly better AF, and all the fancy new toys Panasonic has been working on, like that handheld high-res mode that leaves you with a 100 megapixel raw photo. Whereas the S cameras can only get into the 90s, and that's on a tripod. There is no handheld high-res mode on those cameras. The S-series cameras are amazing because they are bringing you those full-frame lenses and that full-frame look that's really hard, or even sometimes, yes, impossible to get on an MFT or APS-C sensor. They have tons of details, better dynamic range, better low-light performance. That being said, and like I said in my final comment of this video, right, and most full-frame cameras in this price range, the dynamic range is slightly or a good bit better, but surely there's more to an image than dynamic range, and surely there's more to a camera than just the peak image quality. Maybe the IQ is better in Panasonic's full-frame cameras, but they top out with 4K 60 420 and a forced 1.5 times crop on top of that. And the GH6 can record 4K 120 422 with no crop, unlike the S1H, and no record limits like the S5, all for $1,300 less than the S1H sits right now. For me, it's features, frame rates, and price in the GH6, and the ultimate image quality and overall image goes to the full frame, but that comes with a significant price, paid either in features and frame rates or just actual price. I think they clearly both have their place for their respective use cases, and likely people, including myself, will be using both for different situations. Oh, and if you need to shoot in no light situations or need autofocus, you probably went and bought a Canon or Sony a long time ago. Anyway, I doubt he's watching or has ever watched a video of mine, but thanks, Gerald, for doing what you do. You really are one of the best we have on YouTube. And despite that air of negativity in the video, the issues he brought up with the camera are clearly real, and he is doing a great service by doing what he does best, telling us the truth. And even if I think the video was a little too lopsided with what he focused on, at the end of the day, there are going to be, and already are, plenty of positive reviews of the camera, and if you watch one or two of those along with Gerald's video, then you might have a pretty decent idea of the camera. I really actually personally liked the more casual, candid approach of this video, and I hope to see more of this type of stuff. Maybe in the future he can do a blend of some off-the-cuff stuff and some of that, classic teleprompter reads. One more thing before we go. You all need to realize, before you go saying some of the things that you say online, and I'm guilty of it too, but you need to realize that big or small, all these YouTubers and even commenters are just people at the end of the day. And even for big channels like Gerald, those bigger creators see those comments and it could really negatively affect them. Thank you again, Gerald, for your hard work. Thanks for giving us this information. And thanks for making the GH6 a better camera by helping identify these issues for Panasonic, even if you didn't really like the camera that much. He truly is the hero we deserve, but maybe not the one we deserve right now, or vice versa. I don't know. I'm starting to think that quote doesn't really apply here like I thought it might have. Anyway, here's a quick compilation of Gerald's video with just the positives, which unfortunately are less than 4 minutes out of a more than 20-minute review. And I think that says all it should say. Oh, and Philip Bloom commented too, but I think just like Gerald, he kind of missed the point of what I was trying to say, that, they feel like they seem to think that I was just focusing on the specs, when in reality I was doing everything but.
But it still is doing a nice, clean, oversampled image. So all of the 4K images, whether it's 24p up to 120p, are all sharp and similar, which is great. At least a stop better than previous Panasonic Micro Four Thirds cameras. But if you're coming from a GH5S with the dual native ISO, you're still gonna get about another clean stop better than the GH5S. Pretty darn similar. I did a shot here of me holding the chart and checked it on the vector scope and it looked good. So no complaints. Everything's pretty much the same. Just now you have this dynamic range boost, which gives you better performance than you expect on Micro Four Thirds. And what I like about this camera, so if you want to expose the middle gray, that luminance spot meter from the full frame cameras is now on the Micro Four Thirds camera, which is great. But now you can import your own LUTs in cube format to monitor rate on the screen, which is pretty awesome. And I think they can go up to 33-point cube files. So I'm really happy with that. There's nothing from the GH5 that's missing. It's only added things. And if there's something that, if you had a GH5 and then you had a full frame camera from Panasonic, all the full frame stuff that you're expecting is likely in here as well. So basically everything that Panasonic's made up to this point is in this camera. Only now you can do 4-channel audio, so another benefit there. The manual focus, you could set it to linear from non-linear, you could set the degrees of the focus throw. You can do all that control in here now, which is great, but it does give you a little bit when you're behind the camera, which is nice. And then we still have the articulating screen as well. And the clearance is all good from the input and output jacks, which is nice. You can actively charge and power the camera while it's running and all. It's great. It doesn't interfere with the flip screen, which is great. And we've also got a red record button down here, and there's tally lamps on the front and the back, so that is fantastic. You can always map a shortcut function button, which is what I always did, but it's nice that they thought about that because there's nothing I could do to make this camera overheat, so you can record ProRes. The rolling shutter is not a problem. Even if you're at 5.7K full, the dynamic range boost on everything, you can slam the camera around in all different directions. You're gonna see barely anything warp. So rolling shutter is not a problem. Might be the best IBIS that there is. I mean, the same or better than Olympus now, because you still get that fantastic. What do they got here? 7.5 stops of compensation. You know what? I'll do a test for you right now. See that? It just immediately locks it off like a tripod. And that's not even with the boost on. I can now press the boost IS mode if you really want to turn yourself into a human tripod like that. And even with one hand, You can see my hand visibly shaking. And look, it like locks off the frame repeatedly. It has the most sort of like shocking IBIS factor when you do that on-off test, but also it has a lot fewer of those weird wobbly warbly things. They said they spent a lot of time working on that. They already knew they had a good like locked off system, so now they wanted to make like follow shots, not do weird stuff. But I'm really impressed. Oh yeah, and because of that IBIS, you can actually do the, you know, the high res photo mode where you take like multiple photos and stitch them together, get a higher resolution image. You can now do 100 megapixels high res mode handheld because of how good the IBIS is. When it comes to Micro Four Thirds, it's the best Micro Four Thirds camera that there is. Like easily, hands down. But the GH6 is a great example of what Panasonic is able to do when it comes to just giving you giving you just maximum features and functionality. And this camera is a testament to just how much Panasonic can stick in a body, because they stuck everything in here. And I commend Panasonic for what they've put in here. There's even a little pinhole thing on the bottom here. Let me get a shot of this. You see where you screw in your plate here? You see it's got another little hole there? That's so when you use one of those plates, you can put the little spring in there so that it doesn't rotate on you. They thought of everything. They packed everything in here. Good job, Panasonic. Micro Four Thirds is dead to me.